Everybody, this is Anthony Brogdon, your main man, here at Strong Inspirations. And boy, let me tell you, I got a smooth guy on the channel today. Good looking brother. He gonna put it down on you. Let me tell you, I just got finished talking to him, and I was like, "Hey, what we gonna talk about?" He said, "Man, I'm very knowledgeable on a number of topics." He said, "But let's choose this one." And I said, "Whoa, I had not heard that." Oh, you, my friends, you're gonna like what he got to say. Let me tell you, he is very well thought of in his community for what he's doing, for the knowledge that he has. And you're going to get a taste of it here today. Come on now, hit the subscribe button on Strong Inspirations. It don't cost you no money. It's free. I do this for free. I have no sponsors. I do this because I love you, my friends. And I want you to be enlightened by the people who come on the show and educated, inspired, and maybe a little bit entertained too, my friends. This is my calling in life. I enjoy this. We are 3 years old, over 500 videos, over 2,200 subscribers. This thing has grown beyond my imagination, and it's because of you and the people like this gentleman who come on my show. Let me tell you, this guy's so tight, he got people. I had to talk to his people to get to him. And I like that. Matter of fact, when I grow, I want people. All right. And that's how serious he is. He just told me he's going around the country spreading this message. So hit the like button on this video. You're going to like this a lot. Watch. He's going to be thorough. And then hit the love button. Oh, no, there's no love button. But if there was, hit that one. But hit the like button. Oh, and hit the notifications bell. For when the videos come out, you get a ding, a shock, a smoke signal, your lights on your horn, on your car blow, your cell phone goes off, something to let you know there is new content on Strong Inspirations. Did you see the one I did with the lady who says they found out that their great-great-grandfather, as enslaved, played the violin for the enslaver? And my man, the enslaver, thought that, hey, I'm treating y'all pretty fair. Y'all shouldn't have no problem. And him and his wife escaped. Watch that video. Did you see the one I did with Frederick Douglass's 3-time great-grandson? Watch that video. Did you see the one I did with the lady? She's at a museum in a small town, one of them Confederate towns. I think it's in Mississippi or Florida. Just go through all the videos. Just do it all. Take your time. Share this with your kids and your family and the people that don't know good Black history. And people who talk and only hear of one side, the beatdown. That's not all it was. And watch, this gentleman is going to tell you something that's going to make you proud. I just released a video with a lady who grew up in an all-white town. She found out that her ancestors escaped and ended up outside of Detroit. Said she grew up, and it wasn't but 1 or 2 other Blacks in her area, and she is very staunch on Black history. But she came up with that background, and so she's got to understand how to deal with Black folk. Watch that. I'm taking it from all angles. I got a lady on from Australia. Australia. This sister tells us how she grew up in Australia, and there were times she would run around naked. I said, what? She said, yeah, the weather was good, and that's, we had a little something here and there. I said, really? And she tells the story. This right here kind of almost leads into the guest. I got one lady who, she lives in Nova Scotia, Canada. And what happened was her great-great-grandfather fought in that Revolutionary War, and my man ended up in Nova Scotia. That's a lead-in to some extent of what this brother's going to tell you, I guess, in that regard. I got them all over. So come on, do that, my friends. Couple more things before we go. My numbers are up. You all are watching my movie. Business in the Black. I did not know that there were enslaved Black folks who owned businesses. And when I found that out, and I was a much older guy at the time, it blew my mind. So I did some more research and I came out with this documentary. And so watch this. It's streaming on Amazon. It's good. I promise you. And then I went so much further than that and I wrote this book on it. Get you a copy of this book, my friends, and the sales of the books are up. Thank you. You get it on my website, businessintheblack.net. I'll autograph it for you. And it's reasonably priced because I got them in my basement. I don't want them in no more. I want y'all to have these books. We will ship them out almost the same day, if not very sure the next day. And it is also on Amazon. I'm not playing with you. I'm coming at you strong. This coming year in 2024, I'm going on the road. And I got my Freedom Quindaro Festival in Kansas City. More information is coming out on that. Come and meet me at the largest underground railroad site in America. That's what I call it. It's a neighborhood called Quindaro. That's June 7th through the 9th. Very reasonably priced. I'm going to feed you the whole weekend. And I'm going to make you dance. I'm going to let you hear the voices of them ancestors. Come check me out. And if you want me to come to your town, invite me. Let me speak. Let me share some of what I'm talking about. This good Black history. Now, you hear me use this term strong a lot. Strong is my favorite word. I've been saying it for a while. Let me tell you, strong stands for strength, tenacity, resilience, and a sense of oneness, nobility, and grace. And that is my introduction to the guest today. Come on, strong man. Thank you for being on my show. I really appreciate it.
You know, Anthony, I wear a lot of different hats. And I grew up in a political family. I enjoy politics tremendously. So I love a man today who says that I'm not in anyone's hip pocket. I don't take any contributions to anybody. And we hear the politicians say that all the time. But we know in our community, we have to do so much with so little. And much like our grandmothers who had very little, little did we know growing up how little they had, because they knew how to feed us on Thanksgiving with the biggest dinner out there. So, so I appreciate being here. I look forward to meeting with your guest. And, you know, I couldn't help take some notes down as you were speaking because you inspired me. And you're a man who talks to the ancestors. And I like that. And I guess we make good bookends because I'm a man who the ancestors talk to me.
I love it.
I have a lot to share with you. I look forward to sharing with you.
I got to interrupt you, though. Tell us your name.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you were going to have it down on the bottom in large letters.
No.
My name is Rick Murphy.
Okay. Rick Murphy, where are you? Where are you now?
I'm outside of the Washington, D.C. area. This is where I'm living currently. I'm originally from the Boston area. So everybody says that I certainly think like a Bostonian, but if not, I certainly talk like one. So you'll hear those long, flat A's in my conversation.
All right. With that said, let me just ask a couple questions about you personally. Let the audience get to know you. Not too serious. You grew up in Boston. Did you grow up in a all Black neighborhood, white neighborhood? What was that dynamic?
When I was a kid, and that's an interesting question. I lived in Roxbury, Massachusetts, and the neighborhood that I grew up in, Roxbury, Massachusetts, was, when I say predominantly Jewish, it was probably 95% Jewish. But it's not so much that it was a Jewish neighborhood. They were Yiddish Jews, meaning that these were men and women who came out of Russia. Most of them came out of the concentration camps. And these were elderly people, some my age, but they all had the tattoos on their arms. So there were synagogues at the end of the corner. There were Jewish restaurants at the end of the corner. And about the time I went into middle high, the family moved to a white community outside the city.
Okay.
So I graduated from a white high school.
When you say white high school, well, how many blacks were there?
In my graduating class, I think there might have been 6 of us out of a class of maybe 300.
Did you face racial strife at any age, at that growing up, anything like that?
I did not.
Okay.
Um, um, Fortunate for me that when my family moved to the suburbs, we moved to a town where many of the Jewish kids were also moving there at the same time. So I went with them to the junior high, and I didn't receive any type of racial discrimination. And if I did, I would be the first one to say it and share it, but I didn't.
Yeah. So how was it growing up around them though? Did they accept you? I mean, you said you didn't face anything. They accept you. They were your friends, so on and so forth. How did that fit?
Well, at the time, I never thought of the concept of accepting or unaccepting because I didn't receive any type of
Okay.
adversity from anybody. So I
Okay.
was just a regular kid like everybody else. I will admit I was somewhat popular in school, both in junior high and high school, and that may have had something to it. But even the other black kids with whom I grew up with, and we came all different shades, light skin
Yeah.
like me and very
Yeah.
dark skin, because a number of them were West Indians. I mean, we all grew up with the other kids, and I did not receive any pushback. Now
Is that is
Boston,
that is that because Jewish people are more accepting? Is that because I think that is kind of a mantra of them? I know we've talked about it in various ways. For black people to move from segregated parts of the town here in Detroit, it was the white community that accepted them to say, "Oh, you can live in my home once I move." Well, is that something about white people, and in particular Jewish people?
well, when I lived in Boston, it was a Jewish neighborhood. When we moved to the suburbs, it was a mixed white community. Now, prior to busing, Boston was, unlike most places, you were white or you were black. But white meant you were Irish, you were Italian, you were Greek, you were Polish, you were. So the white community is the community had all these different ethnic groups, and they competed amongst themselves, and then you were black. So we didn't have a situation where there was that diversity. Now, clearly it was there. There was discrimination. It was clearly at my parents' age level, was my grandparents' age level. But fortunate for me, my parents grew up in that same environment. My grandparents grew up in that same environment. So we come from a very long lineage of folks in Massachusetts. And
Okay.
those relationships were handed down through the generations. So
Okay.
I think if there was any adversity, it'd be very easy for my father or mother to talk to somebody because they themselves grew up with those same people.
I
So we
got you.
didn't have
I
that
got you.
kind of, but
I
again, it
got you.
wasn't just me, it wasn't just my family, it was the other black kids that we grew up with as well.
Let me ask you this. Let's go back a little further. Where is the slavery at in your family or enslavement? Do you know that story?
Oh, do I know that story? I can trace my lineage. Now, I wear many hats. I am the President General of the Society of the First African Families of English America.
Yeah.
My free ancestors came from the South, and I can date my lineage to John Gowen and Margaret Cornish, were the two Angolans that came off of the slave ship, the San Juan Bautista,
Hmm.
in August 1619. So I have a clear paper trail which I can trace my lineage to 1619. My enslaved ancestors, conversely, came from the North, and I can trace my ancestors to the early 1700s in Massachusetts and in New York.
Okay, hold on. Let me stop you there. Let me stop. When you say enslaved ancestors, what does that mean? They intermingled with your lineages from Angola? What do you mean by enslaved ancestors?
My slave ancestors were from the North. So when they
Oh,
came off the slave ships, they were in the North.
oh, okay. So a lot of times we don't know that. We think that it was always in the South. And that's
Oh,
not the case.
no. Oh,
Yeah,
ap-
yeah.
well, that's what the history books want you to think.
Right, right, right.
No. Now
That's
you
what,
mentioned you had a guest, Nova Scotia, and I can't think of her name off the top of my head, who's the president of the Nova Scotia Society. But I'm sure when she was on your show, she shared with you about the Book of Negroes. And
yes,
that
she
was a
sure
book of
did.
3,000 men, women, and children who lived in New York City at the end of the Revolutionary War. And because they were on the side of the British, they had to leave the now United States and they were sent to Nova Scotia on the
Right,
Book of Negroes. So
right.
clearly, right there in the city of New York, there were 3,000. And I just indicated that I can trace my lineage to those enslaved in the early 1700s in Massachusetts and in New York. So there were a lot of enslaved people in the North. The reason why we don't know about that is at the end of the Revolutionary War, the war ended in 1783, and in Massachusetts, they manumitted all of their slave people at the end of the Revolutionary War. So we tend not to think that because we're taught to think that our ancestors came around the Civil War because they don't want us to know that our ancestors were here back in the 16 and 1700s. In fact, 2/3 of our ancestors were here before the end of the Revolutionary War, which means that we are the second indigenous people in this nation because this is where our stock comes from those enslaved people. So by not letting us know that and making us think that our ancestors only came at the time of the Civil War means that we don't have claim to any rights of this country. Our ancestors were actually founders of America, which they don't tell us. They don't share that. They want us to think that we were only enslaved people, and they want us to think that we have enslaved mentality because they don't want us to understand that the reality is our folks were here before many of them left the poor parts of Europe.
When you talk about they were enslaved in New York area, what have you, did they work farms or was that more in the house? Do you know some of those occupations that they made them do?
It was diverse. Now you got to remember that the North was colder in temperature than the South. And as a result of that, the North was also more industrialized than the South. So many of the enslaved who lived in the North were involved in farming, no doubt, but they were also involved in some of the industrial trades. And they were taught in the industrial trades. And also there were those that worked the houses as well. Women primarily worked in the house in the North, whereas in the South, the women primarily were those who worked in the field. And in the South, men primarily did the industrious work as they did in the North. But
Was
industry in the North was different than industry in the South.
sure was Northern enslavement more brutal or as brutal as it was in the South?
Well,
Yeah,
first of all, the institution of enslavement was a brutal institution. So I'm not sure if there can be any distinction between the two. But clearly, enslavement in the South was much more harsh than it was in the North. In the South, the plantation had large numbers of enslaved people, and to control them, they had to be harsher. In the North, um, um, there primarily were smaller family units. Therefore, the number of those who owned enslaved had fewer slaves, and many of them lived in the household or lived in the barns or lived in different sections of the household. Whereas in the South, they lived out in the various slave cabins.
is slavery ended in the northern part much earlier than it did in the southern part. What did that help? And I'm sure the answer is yes. But what was that dynamic for those black people who lived in the north? Did that allow them to have more a quicker? I'm asking a question, and it was it. I'm sure it was better for them that it ended earlier. I think that's the question.
Well, slavery didn't end in the South until the end of the Civil War, and with
Right,
with the 14th Amendment.
right.
Was it the 13th?
13th.
13th Amendment, the
Right,
13th
right,
Amendment. That's
right.
when slavery ended. But during the Revolutionary War, it ended in 1783. Prior to the Revolutionary War, in your northern states, they developed state constitutions. In Massachusetts, they wrote in their state constitution that all men are created equal. So the writers of the state constitution of Massachusetts wrote that explicitly in the state constitution. Over 2,000 men, African men, almost 85% enslaved from Massachusetts, at the end of the war, they went to the framers of the Constitution of Massachusetts and said, we believe in the Declaration of Independence. We believe in the state constitution that all men are created equal. Are we created equal? And they said yes, and they manumitted the enslaved people the same year that the Revolutionary War ended in 1783. So you got to remember, Crispus Attucks was the first person who happened to be an Afro-Indigenous enslaved man to die for the revolutionary cause on March 5th, 1770. So that was almost 6 years before the outbreak of the Revolutionary War. So these discussions were taking place in Massachusetts long before the Revolutionary War. And those enslaved people in Massachusetts who were able to attend to churches with their slaveholders, although they had to sit up in the attic in the vestibule, they heard those sermons from those congregational ministers. And you got to remember, those congregational ministers were abolitionists during the Revolutionary War, but they were also the abolitionists during the Civil War, and they were also, their descendants were the Freedom Riders in the 1960s. So the Congregational Church played a very, very big role in terms of the enlightenment of those in the North, as well as the Quakers from Pennsylvania. So a lot of those religious institutions, their rhetoric reverberated within those Black communities. So you had a very enlightened group of people. So those people who came out of the Revolutionary War, they had no intentions of helping the colonies win the Revolutionary War and go back to enslavement. So there was an enlightenment there. And that's one of the reasons why their history has been denied to them all these years, because those southern states did not want the word to get out that Black men had guns and shot and killed Englishmen. So now you can understand why that history was intentionally lost and forgotten. And that's why we call the men, women, and children of the American Revolution the Forgotten Patriots. That was by design.
We're going to get to that, but I'm trying to get to a little bit on this dynamic. Now, the British brought enslaved people to the northern part. Did they also bring them to the southern part too of America? Or was that more Portuguese and Spain and other parts? Because the British, even though they might have did it first, other than the Spain going to Florida, they seem like they accepted, they illegalized the institution before the rest of Europe did. Am I right on that assumption?
No, you get several premises there.
Okay.
The Portuguese, the Spanish and the Portuguese were involved in the slave trade some 200 years before the English got involved. The Portuguese and the Spanish, you've heard the childhood rhyme, 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. So Spain and Portugal were looking for trade routes to the Far East. They had no idea that there was this big continent in the middle called the Americas. So they were looking for trade routes to the East, and as they did that, they were also going down the coast of Africa. In 1493, the Pope divided the world in half, and he gave Portugal the eastern part of what he thought was the world, and he gave Spain the western part of what he thought was the world. But at that point in time, they didn't understand that the continents of North and South America were in the middle. So Portugal began to go down the coast of Africa, and that began the slave trade in 1493. You got to remember that England is a Protestant nation, which meant that they protested the Pope. That's where the word Protestant came from. So they had no access to Africa until some 200 years later. So it was the Portuguese and the Spanish that was involved in the slave trade, like I said, a couple of hundred years before the English did. Now, the English traded in slaves in very, very small numbers. when when North America was founded, the 13 colonies, it was not the intent of England to populate the 13 colonies with people from Africa. That was not their intent. Now, I wrote the book, the best-selling book, The Arrival of the First Africans, where I outline this in the book. You can get it off of Amazon.com. You can type in Rick Murphy, RICMURPHY, won all kinds of awards. I've won the Phyllis Wheatley Award. But above and beyond that, I talk quite a bit about the formation of how we came here as a people. And it was by accident. Now, when England sent ships to colonize America, it was their intent to populate it with the poor peasants of England. They wanted to empty the overpopulation of England and send them to America, just like what they did to Australia, where they sent people out of prison, they sent vagabonds, they sent runaway children, they sent pressed maidens. So this was their way of cleaning England, sending these people to America. But what happened in 1619, Portugal went to war in Angola. The first couple of attempts, they lost. They finally won in January of 1619. They put the royals on a ship. That ship was 500 miles off the coast of Mexico. So when they put these people on the San Juan Bautista, they were enslaved. They were branded, put on a slave ship, and the intent was to slave them, send them to South America to work the sugar plantations. This one particular ship, the San Juan Bautista, was pirated by two English ships, the White Lion and the Treasurer. When they pirated that ship, the two ship captains took 30 on one ship, 30 on another, 60 in total, and they brought them here to Virginia, the colony of Virginia. So that's how the first Africans came. They came from Angola by way of a Spanish ship. It wasn't until the late 1600s, the early 1700s, when tobacco, the cash crop, became so prominent. And as you know, tobacco strips the nutrients from the soil. So after 2 years, they had to keep expanding more and more land. And that's when they started to get into the wars with the indigenous people here in Virginia and North Carolina. And as they got more and more land, they needed more and more people. And at that point, there weren't enough people in England. So that's when the Americans, the English, decided to go to Africa to begin to bring enslaved people over here. But in addition to that, the English had no understanding of farming, animal husbandry. They had very little experience in operating in a semi-tropical climate because they're coming from England. And the Africans, or the Angolans, so we should call them by the nation that they came from, the Angolans who came here had tremendous knowledge in farming and animal husbandry. So when they say they went there to bring over unskilled people, that is not true. All those plantations up to that point were on the verge of bankruptcy, starvation. They were resorted to cannibalism, as I outlined in the book. And when the Angolans came here, they're the ones that enlightened them on how to grow tobacco, how to grow the herds through animal husbandry. So they went there initially for the skills of those Angolans.
Okay, now we got that okay, that, and so then what happened? Yeah, keep going. I don't. Yeah, what? So after that, they're in Virginia, but then they move up towards the colonies, which is up north. They go to New Yorks and the Delawares and so on and so forth.
Well, you got to remember, the ships that brought these Africans here, Southerners didn't have ships. They were not into industrialization. They were not into trade. Those ships came from Boston and New York. So those ship captains were the ones who were involved in the transatlantic slave trade. So what they did is they went back home and they gradually started to bring small numbers of Africans back into the New England and the New York area.
Okay. But then they started going down to the Charleston, the port in Charleston, and so on and so forth. When they were coming
Go ahead. That's part of the transatlantic slave trade. That's correct.
Right, right.
Now,
So,
as time went on in the 1700s, and as the English colonies began to spread outwards, each of those colonies had different types of climate, different kinds of weather, and different types of topography of the land. So South Carolina was more swamp-like, and tobacco wouldn't grow in that kind of environment. So they began to grow rice. So they had to go to parts of Africa to bring those Africans here who had skills in swamp-like climate and land use, and also who knew rice. So they went up further north and they went to Ghana because those folks were skilled in that particular area. So they began to go to parts of Africa based on where they were coming from and the types of skills that they needed in those particular areas.
all right, got you.
So that's
Love
why
it.
we've got
Yeah,
descendants
yeah.
of Angolans, we've got descendants from Nigeria, we got descendants from Ghana, because the English began to go to those parts of Africa to reach out to those types of enslaved people who could come here with those needed skills that they needed to bring back here. Now, by the time you get to the 1800s, that becomes a moot point because there was so much mixture amongst the enslaved people, then that's why we today, they say in Africa that we're mutts, because we're a mixture of all of the various tribes in Africa.
Oh, okay, I love it. I love it. So then what happens is now the people in the northern part, like you say in Boston or what have you, are they against slavery for economic reasons, for religious reasons? Is there one other reason or the other that make them feel that way for the ending of it?
Well, the majority people, as I indicated before,
Right.
in Boston and gradually in New York and Pennsylvania, were abolitionists. And
Oh,
you
but on what
mentioned you had,
basis?
pardon me?
But on what basis?
Well,
What
I'm
was
gonna
their
get to that.
basis for
I'm
feeling that?
gonna get to
Okay,
that.
okay, okay, okay. Go ahead.
Now, you mentioned you had Frederick Douglass's, I guess it'd be his fifth great grandson on. And as you know, Frederick Douglass was a big abolitionist. And the Black abolitionists were against slavery, period. They were against the institution of slavery. They believed that no man should own another man. And that was the abolitionist movement, such as William Lloyd Garrison, who was white, whereas Frederick Douglass was an abolitionist who was Black. So it was against the institution that no man should be able to own another. And that came out of the church environment in which they were familiar with. They came out of the Congregational church. You got to
Okay.
remember that the Congregationists were Puritans and they believed in purity.
Okay. And the Quakers play a role in that too, correct?
Quakers as well, absolutely. That's why they were big
Yeah.
abolitionists.
Yes, they play a role in that. So
And you
then what
also,
happened? Go ahead.
and I don't mean to interrupt you, but you also got
Yeah,
to
go
remember
ahead.
the financial incentives for the enslaver in the North was substantially different than the financial incentive for the enslavers in the South. An enslaver in the North, the financial incentive was to teach a skill to their enslaved person. So they could make shoes, they could make clothes. They wanted them to have a trade because it was those trades that they sent overseas to make money. In the South,
Oh,
their
okay.
financial incentive was to grow
Okay.
crops. So the more land you had to make a profit, you had to have free labor to do that. So there was a
Okay.
huge difference in financial incentive. There was no incentive for someone in the North to have 200 or 300 slaves. Where are you going to put them? How are you going to feed
Yes.
them? Where are they going to
Yes.
live?
Right.
But in the
Oh,
South, they
good.
put them, so they had large numbers. So that's why when you see these pictures in the South, you'll see hundreds and hundreds of enslaved people working the fields.
Yes.
It was a totally
Okay.
different incentive. And
Okay.
after a while, that incentive in the North evaporated. It's better off having 5 or 6 sons who do the work for you. So when you get old, they're going to continue to do the work for you. When the
Right.
enslaved person when you're old and they're old, they're not going to make any money for you. So there was a less of an incentive in the North They
I
have
love
large
it.
numbers of enslaved people.
Okay, I love it. Okay, ooh, everybody I told you is gonna like this. They put it on you. That explains it. Okay, let's go into this into the war. The war, tell us the dynamics of the war and the expatriates and whatnot.
Well, the Revolutionary War was one about um, personal freedoms. It was about independence. It was the ability to live without extraordinary taxes from a government across the seas. So many of the English who now lived in the colonies in the 1700s, they were 3, 4, 5 generations removed from England. So they knew they were Englishmen, but they were far removed. And when England started this heavy levy of different taxes, particularly in Massachusetts, where they called the Stamp Act, every piece of paper which represented a financial transaction was taxed. And they kept taxing them and kept taxing them, and they revolted against the taxation without representation. They had no representation over in England, but England wanted to keep taxing and taxing, and that was the birth of the American Revolution. But as in these churches and folks in the town square, they were big in the town square where somebody would stand up on the stoop and ring the bell, and the town crier is going to give you the news. And they talked about what was going on in England, but they also talked about the taxation that resonated with people. And many of your northern colonies, integration's a different term the way we think now, but they weren't segregated to the part where the northern blacks didn't hear what was going on. They heard what was going on. It resonated with them. It made sense to them. So again, now you're getting 3 or 4 generations, and they're becoming more enlightened, more understanding. They know what's going on. So during the Revolutionary War, as I indicated, 85% of Black men who served in the Revolutionary War, and we know it's over 6,631 Black men served in the Revolutionary War for the Continental side, and some 20,000 Black men served on the English side. They did that because they wanted to become free. So they had a vested interest. So they went in as enslaved men, and they wanted to make sure that at the end of the war, they came out as free men. So there was an incentive for them to go into the Revolutionary War, but it was an incentive not only to become free, but it was also an incentive for their families and the generations to come to be free people of color. So there was incentives. So whether you were in the South fighting for the British, or whether you were in the North fighting for the Continentals, there was an incentive. Now, in the North, they said that if you fight for 1 year, you'll get your freedom. So what do you think those Black men did? They fought for 1 year.
Okay.
And when they said, if you fight for 3 years, we give you land. So what do you think those men did? They fought for 3 years. But more important than that, there was something else that really piqued their curiosity, because it was the first time they got paid as enslaved men for their service. So many of those men served for 40, 50, 78 months because they were getting paid. This is the first time an enslaved Black man was getting money for their service.
Okay, let me stop you there. Okay, you're enslaved. What is your enslaver's attitude about you being not working his situation and fighting in the war? Did they do what they could to stop him from that, or saying, "Hey, I still need you to toil the grass. I still need you to do whatever I taught you to do"?
Now, are we
Or
talking about the North or in the South?
let's do both of them. What was the difference in the attitudes?
Well, in the North, most men in the North actually enlisted to serve in the Revolutionary War.
White men too.
I'm saying most white men in the North served in the Revolutionary War. So they're serving alongside their former enslaved person.
Oh, really?
These are integrated troops. Now, the South is a little bit different. And those highbrow Southerners, they didn't care if their enslaved person served in the war, because the Continental Congress put a quota on every state, every county. You got to come up with so many men. And in the South, what they did is they made their enslaved men served as their substitutes. So they didn't want their sons to go in the Revolutionary War, so they had an enslaved person take the place of their son.
Did they give them guns? Did the enslaved people that fought in the war?
They got guns.
Mm. Okay. Now, some of them fought and let me I'm going. How about this one? Some of them fought, and this is both North and South. Some of them fought for the British. Some of them fought for America. What was those fights like? I'm shooting,
hand-to-hand combat.
but I'm shooting you. Now, okay, what would a black person, enslaved black person, what was his reasoning for fighting against another enslaved black person who was fighting to hope to free that person from enslavement?
Well, they didn't quite look at it that way. Now, first of all, in the South, many of those that signed up for the English, as the English started to lose the war, they disappeared. They went into the woods. They went into the swamps. They ran away. They became runaways. So that was a major problem for the English, is that the enslaved people, as they began to realize that they may not be free because they're not winning the war, they began to take off. So the black man from the North really didn't have to fight the black man from the South, because they began to disappear.
Oh, okay. Okay. All right. What about when they were fighting in these battles? Were there battles? What was the percentage of who won? Did the English always lose? They won some battles.
Oh no, no. It was a long, bloody war. It was a long, expensive war. It was a long, tiring war. And there were more draws and wins and losers on both sides. The Americans won primarily, and I'm sure some of my Revolutionary War historians will disagree with me, but to simplify for the purpose of discussion here, the Americans won primarily because they trapped Lord Cornwallis down at Yorktown. And when the French came in and helped surround them by sea, and they get trapped by land, the British lost a large part of their army, and that's what ended the war. So the English didn't win more than we did. They perhaps were more successful in more wars than we were, but we won as well. But I think for this purpose of this narrow discussion, it was more of a draw, and it was more because Cornwallis got trapped down at Yorktown.
When the war was happening, how many people did the English send over here to help fight? Or what was, you know what I mean? Did they bring a lot of people on them ships over here to let's
yes.
fight to make sure it happened?
Yes. And off the top of my head, I don't have that number.
Yeah.
It was a good number. Now, on the American side, there were 200,000 men who fought in the Continental Army, and another 60 to 80,000 at the state militia. So close to 300,000 between state militia and the Continental Army. And I would say the British probably had an equal number, if not more.
No. So the British had to be sending a lot of ships over here.
Absolutely.
Okay.
We were making a lot. The colonies were making a lot of money for England, and England was losing a lot of money on us.
I got you.
All about money.
What about in terms of, you have any idea of the number of black people that fought for either side, what those numbers might have been?
Again, on the American side, we know at least 6,683 men of color served. We know that from their pension records. So 6,683 men received a pension from the United States government as a result of their service in the military. There were a large number of men who did not receive pensions because they weren't qualified because they had their own farms and they were not financially destitute. Approximately 20,000 served for the British. So you had a lot of men on both sides fighting for their own freedom.
When you what you say that the lost, what did you say, the lost, what, the Patriots?
Forgotten Patriots.
And you call it, you say that for what reason? Why do you say that? Why do you title it that?
First of all, I descend from 14 men who served in the Revolutionary War. Of that 14, I descend from 8 American men of African descent, Black men, 8, who served in the Revolutionary War. 3 came from the South, 5 came from the North. And the reason they were forgotten is primarily in the South, they didn't want that history to get out, that Black men had guns and they were shooting Englishmen. And after the Revolutionary War is when they started to have all the slave revolts in the South, because those who fought in the war were telling other Blacks, primarily in the South, that this war took place. So they had to quash that. So they literally erased that history from the American books. They didn't want that history to go out so long as there was slavery in the country, because here you got these men from the North who had guns. Peter Salem was a leader. And we're going to be releasing, so the Society of the First African Families, we're going to write 5 books about the 5 theaters of war. And we're going to tell the story of the American Revolutionary War through the eyes of the Black soldiers. And we're going to do 5 documentaries on each of those theaters, so people within those communities, within those states, will understand what took place during the American Revolution.
Okay.
And why that history was lost, why it was forgotten. So they are called America's Forgotten Patriots.
When you talk about, where did those wars happen? Did they happen in the South, or they happened more in the northern part of the country?
There were 5 theaters of war. The first theater is called the Northern Theater. That was in New England states and northern New York. The Mid-Atlantic Theater was around New York City, New Jersey, Delaware, Pennsylvania, and Maryland. The Southern Theater was from Virginia all the way south. The Western Theater was west of the Appalachian Mountains, and the Naval Theater were the battles on the waterways. So those are the 5 theaters of war.
Did those all happen at different times, or some kind of continuously?
Between 1776 and 1783, from the beginning of the war in 1776 to the end of the war in 1783.
So what is that, 6 years?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, okay. I love it.
7 years. 7 years.
7 years, yeah.
6.5 years.
What do you want people to get out of this?
Number one, if you want to understand the history of our ancestors and how they left Angola and Africa, this is a rich book because it talks about the skills that our ancestors brought here, the arrival of the first Africans. The Society of the First African Families, our website is sofafea.org. We have a webpage called a tab on the tabs here called The Forgotten Patriots. We will be releasing on Martin Luther King Day this Monday, January 15th, a trailer explaining who the Forgotten Patriots are. If you go to our Forgotten Patriots site, you'll see all kinds of information that we're in the process of building out. You're going to learn about the large numbers of Americans of African descent are now tracing their ancestry back to the Revolutionary War. More and more men, women, and children are doing that. They had no idea that they descended from these Forgotten Patriots. We will be doing an awful lot all around the country on Forgotten Patriots. So these would be your ancestors that you didn't even know about. So we're going to help you find them. We're going to help you document them. We're going to peer review your lineage, and you're going to be able to join the Society of the First African Families of English America. If you want to know more, type in my name, Rick Murphy. Just type in Rick Murphy. I got all kinds of stuff up there. Look for the Society of the First African Families of English America. And the next time I get invited, maybe we can do more about that. And I will actually be able to show you some of these promos on the YouTube site here.
Okay. Let me, how did you find this? How did you know? How did this become your calling?
I told you the ancestors speak to me. The ancestors came to me. My maternal and my paternal grandfathers who knew about the family history because it had been passed down through the family. So I knew as a child that I descended from Revolutionary War soldiers. I knew their names. I knew their names from the north, and I knew their names from the south. This is something that was widely talked within the family. So it was nothing that was kept from us. The family was very proud. Again, we lived in white communities, so we had to let them know that we were as important, if not more important than they are. There was no topic that they could come up with that we could now talk them.
Got you.
But my grandfathers felt it was very important that someone take this knowledge and this history, but also the documentation. In my early 20s, both grandfathers introduced me to their grand aunts and uncles. So as a 20-year-old, I'm meeting people who were in their 90s, which meant they took me back to the early 1800s. They knew their grandparents. They knew their grandparents. This was a phenomenal lesson for me. So my ancestors came to me. And all these oral stories that I heard, intellect will tell me that these are just oral family stories. So I began to do the research. And oh my Lord, the documents that I was able to find blew my mind. My grandmother, my maternal grandmother, knew her paternal grandmother. Her name was Harriet Gowen. That name had no meaning to me. I started to research Harriet Gowen. I found her marriage record going back to the 1800s. I found her parents' marriage records going to the mid-1800s, and I found their parents' marriage records going to the early 1800s. The name Gowen had no meaning to me. But then I started finding these land records, taking me to the late 1700s, the early 1700s. Then I find them in the 1600s. And then I find John Gowen and his wife, Margaret Cornish, off the ship of the San Juan Bautista, and they came from Angola. Holy moly.
Yeah. I got you.
The
I got
ancestors
you.
came to speak to me.
I got
So
you. I
the
love
same
it.
thing happened on all four grandparents had such unique stories. I was able to find the documentation in the various records all around the country. So these stories that I had heard as a child and all of my cousins heard as children that were ingrained in us, we heard them over and over again. When someone came to visit, the stories erupted because you had to explain how you were related to this person, where this person came from.
I got you.
Over and over again. I told you I lived in Boston. My folks were big on history. Every single weekend, we went to a historical site to the point that we knew the story even before we got to the site. I can't tell you how many times I went to the battle site of the Boston Massacre where Crispus Attucks was assassinated.
I got you.
That's in my DNA now.
I got you. I love it.
Over and over and over. And so I tell people today, if you have these stories, tell them to your grandkids. They're not listening consciously, but they're hearing you subconsciously.
That's right.
And you're going to tell that story over and over again. And at some point in time, when they get gray hairs, they will remember those stories and they too will get that research. But that's why it's important we put them in these books here.
That's right. That's right. I love it. Just a couple more. Okay, you got me going. Well, do you have to go to Europe to get some of your research to I mean, you know what I mean? Or the internet allows you to do it, but going over there, have you gone over there to find documents or something like that?
When I did my research, again, I said to you,
Yeah,
my people, your people, our people are the second indigenous people of this nation.
right.
I didn't need to go anywhere. My people were all here since 1619. I went to these various county courthouses. I went to their real estate offices. I went to the churches. I didn't need to go over there to find my
I
African
got you. I
ancestors.
got you.
My
I got
people,
you.
my people are here. Your
I
people
got
are
you.
here.
That's
Your
right.
audience's people are here. You don't
That's
need to
right.
go to, why am I going to go to Europe to find my African ancestors?
Okay. Okay. And they
If I'm
kept
looking
good
for my white
documents.
ancestors, yeah, I'm
Right,
going to
right,
go to Europe.
right. I got you. They kept good documents of all this information for the most part. It's
At
somewhere out there.
the only time, the answer is yes. The only time documents can't be found is if the courthouses were burned in the Revolutionary War or if they were burned in the Civil War. So when the troops came in and they burned the town down, they burned those records down. But oftentimes after the war, they try to rebuild those records because those landowners had to be able to prove that they owned the land.
Oh, okay.
And you got to remember, and I think this is important. You heard me say my free people are from the South, my enslaved people are from the North. My people, your listening audiences, our ancestors were free, they were freed, and they were enslaved. But more important, don't go look for a birth certificate in 1789 and get discouraged when you can't find it. Nobody had a birth certificate. Birth certificates were not mandated until 1905. You got to find us in the land records. And if your ancestors were enslaved, look for the land records because we were more valuable as enslaved people than when we were free people. So you'll find us in bank documents. You'll find us in wills. You'll find us in marriage certificates because we were given as wedding gifts. So you got to look for those land. So if you're looking for marriage certificates and birth certificates and death certificates, you're going to become very frustrated and not find anything. Go find those land records. That's where you're going to find us.
I got you. I love it. I got this another question. What is a blue blood? You know that term they talked about New England when black people blue bloods or whatever. What is that? Do you know
That
that?
beats the hell out of me. When we all bleed, it's red. Now,
Okay.
a blue blood is supposed to be someone who can trace their lineage to somebody important in England. That
Oh,
was their way of making the distinction between themselves and the other poor white people who lived in a particular area. They would say, oh, I'm a blue blood because I can trace my lineage to somebody in England.
oh, okay. That explains it. Everybody, I told you you're gonna like this. Oh my God. And I like his passion, your passion, my friend, saying, hey, don't stop. We're gonna come back at it. I want to. I want to keep following this story. And the programs that you have in your organization, do y'all have a dinner or something like that that you all do? Or
We have an annual conference. Our next conference is going to come up on April 26th, 27th. We're going to be at the Museum of the American Revolution in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Our ticket sales go online, I believe, next week or the week after.
okay,
We have a journal where we encourage Black folks who are able to trace their ancestry to the 1600s, the 1700s, to put their family trees in the journal so that other descendants can find out who their ancestors were and take it back
okay,
further.
okay,
We just launched this massive Forgotten Patriots project. I believe if you type in the URL Forgotten Patriots, you'll begin to find the stuff. We're going to have a lot more coming online in the next couple of years. We have nearly 75 descendants of Revolutionary War soldiers helping to write the story of the Revolutionary War through the eyes of the Black soldier and through the eyes of their ancestors. we're knocking it out of the park. We're doing a whole
Okay, I
bunch of
love
stuff.
it.
We want to make sure that America understands that we were the original, I'm sorry, we are the second indigenous people of this land. We also want America to understand that our ancestors were the founders of America. So while they attempted to make the forgotten patriots forgotten, we're going to unforget that fallacy, and we're now going to say America's forgotten patriots were the founders of America. By every definition, so this isn't a made-up definition, all the terminology that defines the founder of America, who helped in the battle of the Revolutionary War, considered founders of America. Here we are, here we come, looking for you to join us.
There you go. I got another one. There are other organizations out there. A friend of mine, she found out her father served as a union officer. There's Daughters of Union People. Can you know the name of some of the other
Oh,
organizations?
hey, listen. I told you my grandparents told me the story.
Yeah,
I intentionally joined all these organizations through my African ancestors. So you're talking about the Society of the Union Veterans.
that's right.
I have 4 United States colored troops. In fact, you had Frederick Douglass's great-grandson on. Frederick Douglass's son, Philip, was in the Massachusetts 5th Cavalry. He was a sergeant. There were 2 other sergeants. One of those sergeants was Sergeant William Cornwell. Sergeant William Cornwell is my 4th great-grandfather. He served alongside Sergeant Benjamin Douglass. And if you remember the movie Lincoln, when Frederick Douglass asked Lincoln, when he went down to St. Petersburg, if he can bring his son and his friend back because they were badly wounded in the
Right,
Battle of Petersburg, that
right.
was Philip Douglass and my great-grandfather, William Douglass. I have a picture of William Douglass. I guess
Yeah.
it won't take, I can show it to you in his military uniform. He was brought back to Richmond by President Abraham Lincoln. If you get my book, Freedom Road, I got it all spelled out in
You
Freedom
got
Road.
that book right there too?
Freedom
Freedom Road?
Road. I have it around here.
Okay, we're gonna say that for the next one then.
I don't see it. I know it's in the library. I'm in the office and it's in the
Yeah, yeah,
library,
yeah,
in the
yeah.
office here. I don't
Okay,
have it here.
okay.
But you can go Freedom Road, rickmurphy.com, Freedom Road. It's on Amazon. You can find it. I've got Frederick Douglass's story there. So there's a whole bunch. Also, we have the new society. They're actually around 7 or 8 years. The Society of the Sons and Daughters of the United States Middle Passage. So if you can document, and everyone here should be able to document their enslaved ancestor, you can join the Society of the Sons and Daughters of the Middle Passage. Who would
All
have thought
right.
there would have been an actual lineage society where you can provide your documentation, get it peer reviewed, get a certificate where you can give to your grandchildren and say, here's a certificate to prove that you know who your enslaved ancestor was. How important can that be?
Wow.
And let me say one final thing before
Go
you
ahead,
get
go
me
ahead,
off
go
the air.
ahead, go ahead, go ahead.
As a former educator, I know we lose our young Black boys in the 3rd or 4th grade, depending on what state they live in. We lose them again in junior high, and we lose them again in high school. And why do we lose them in the 3rd or 4th grade? Because that's the year that they begin to teach slavery and they see Black men in chains. And psychologically, that stays back there. Black men in chains. We believe that's our destiny because that's what's in the textbook. How important do you think it would be if we could tell our young boys, like I was taught, my father was taught, my grandfathers were taught at a very young age? At a very young age, your ancestor was a founder of America. So you started this off by, was I discriminated against? My father protected us. My uncles protected our cousins. We learned these lessons. So when it came time to sit in a white classroom and the story of enslaved people came up and everyone turned around and looked at me, I was able to tell them that my ancestor was a founder of America.
There you go. Let me tell you something. I didn't know how deep this was going to go at the beginning, and he put it on us.
Well, I'm not just another pretty face now.
Not at
I
all.
I
Yeah,
can get
another
deep
pretty,
here. I
yeah,
can
he
get
go
deep.
deep. He go deep. We're gonna have him on. We're gonna talk offline about the programs that you have and so on and so forth. Come back on the show anytime you want to. I want to keep this going. This has become your mission, your passion.
Along with many others. I wear
Yeah, yeah,
I
yeah, yeah. But
unfortunately wear a lot of
nonetheless, this, and you're on to something big here.
oh, also, I'm sorry,
Yeah,
you
go
got me
ahead,
on a
go ahead.
roll here. I did a documentary on the arrival of the first Africans. The documentary came out in June 19th, 2023. I've won about 25, 30 international film festivals. So you can find, if you go to the arrivalfirstafricans.com, there's a website there. You'll see the trailer. We're up on Prime, so you can get us off Amazon Prime. We're on Vimeo. We're on all kinds of other things. And we're winning all these international film festival awards based on the book and the documentary that I did on the arrival of the first Africans.
There you
And
go.
everybody is saying to me, wow, we did not know. And I got one more thing. I promise
There you
one more
go.
thing.
There you go. There you go.
This past August, I was asked to be the guest speaker at African Landing Day in Hampton, Virginia. And at that evening, the city of Hampton premiered the movie. Now, at African Landing Day, in the first row was a delegation from Angola, a delegation from Senegal, and a delegation from Mozambique. And I got a nice standing ovation. That evening, they came to the premiere. And from there, I did not know, and you have to see the documentary to understand what I'm saying. In the 1400s to the 1600s, Angola had such rich documentation. Of all the African nations, they had the best documentation they could document. But the Angolan Civil War, all of that stuff was destroyed.
Oh,
All of it was destroyed. And I'm being told by the Angolans today that they're now finding where to get their documents that were lost and destroyed that are in Europe. From my book and from the documentary. So you got to read the book, you got to see the documentary to understand what I'm talking about.
Okay. We're going to put all that in the description, everybody. Everybody, hit the subscribe button on Strong Inspirations. We've been enlightened today. Hit the like button on this video because there is no love button. Hit the notifications bell for when the videos come up. You get notified, like I said earlier. And tell somebody about Strong Inspirations. Don't keep it to yourself, please. Let them hear this video. If you don't hear none other, let them hear this, and he'll be back. Follow him, go to his website, so on and so forth. Everybody, do me a favor, watch my movie, read my book, go to my website, businessintheblack.net. And to you, my brother, I say this, and I mean this with all sincerity. I want you to stay strong, stay safe, stay on your grind. I love what you're doing. I love what you become. I love you found this mission. You helping people. You an icon. I don't say that to every guest. Not all of them have their own iconic ways, but you are. There's no question about you own something huge. You are changing the way America has to see itself. You and the people that work with you, but I'm sure up under your leadership. Thank you for coming on. Bye-bye. We out.
My pleasure.
Peace.
Thank you.
Yeah.